and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike and Jim. This episode is brought to you in part by Ride-On Optics. Ride-On makes scopes, red dots, binoculars with a lifetime guarantee. The owner, Brady, is a prior federal law enforcement officer and a veteran. He is serious about his products, and he will back up his stuff, so make sure you go check them out. You use the discount code TACTANGENTS to get 15% off. Again, it's rideonoptics.com. Tonight we have MJ the Marine back with us.
And if you don't recall from the last time we had her on the show, MJ is a badass Marine Corps officer, helicopter pilot, and graduate of the United States Naval Academy. We don't hold that against her. And we're grateful to have her. She's awesome. And I think a lot of people could stand to learn a lot of things from her. So we're always excited when we get her on the show. Yeah.
So we were talking before we kind of formulated this into a podcast episode about a difference between the Air Force and the Marine Corps and something that they do with their pilots. MJ, you were telling me that pilots in the Marines get sent out to like other bases sometimes, and I guess that's a foreign thing or a new thing for the Air Force, or?
Yeah, so I'll let her explain her side of it, but generally speaking, in the Air Force, we can send a plane off station to go do training locally at some other base, but we don't do it very often, and it takes a lot of work because we have to move a maintenance package with it to keep generating that airplane, and we haven't done it as much as we should, given that in future fights against, hypothetically, the Russians or the Chinese, our bases are held at risk by their weapons, right? So we might need to move around from base to base to base quickly, and we haven't been practicing that as much as we should, so we're in this big scramble to do it. As it turns out, it's something the Marines just do as a matter of habit. Can you speak to that a little bit, MJ?
Yeah, great to be with you guys again tonight. So we were talking about that, and it was actually kind of in the context of just what our day-to-day lives were like in the military, and kind of the battle rhythm of our jobs. But it's really important in the Marine Corps. We kind of pride ourselves on being expeditionary, and that's the key word there. And it might be a little bit easier for us because our squadron has the maintenance and the flying operational aspects integrated into one unit. So we don't kind of have to do any external coordination for that. So pretty often, I would say during my time in the squadron, every couple of months, we would have a planned detachment, we would call them, a detachment for training, as like a mini deployment where most of the squadron would go, and we would pick out a different location we wanted to go to get, and sometimes it was to support other Marine Corps training exercises, sometimes it was to prepare ourselves for deployment, and sometimes it was to access other training ranges that would normally take us a longer time to fly out to. So there's varying purposes, but the exercise is good because you have to go through the whole process of figuring out what is it that we really need, packing it up, planning to get there, and then planning on how we're going to operate in an unfamiliar environment, going through, getting all the new maps and studying the new course rules for the new airfield and just all the new contacts that you have to make. Some of those things sound kind of trivial, but even just forcing the younger co-pilots and people that are working in operations to go out and just make new contacts and work through that problem set is a good learning exercise and a good way to make ourselves more proficient.
I think in the last episode that we had you on, we talked a little bit about dealing with challenges and the resilience in overcoming those sorts of things. And so you talked about working out of an airfield and its unfamiliar terrain. So back in the day, John Boyd, when he was kind of shunned by the Air Force, helped the Marines kind of rewrite their doctrine, right?
Yeah, he was involved in the development of MCDP-1, the Marine Corps Doctrine Pamphlet 1, right?
Right. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think...
I don't think it's publication, not pamphlet.
Oh, my bad.
It's a little more substantial than a pamphlet.
It's like 50 pages. By Air Force standards, it's a pamphlet.
Well, and that's... Interestingly, that's somewhere we can go with this.
And it's drawn in crayon, obviously.
Right. But I think, that was one of Boyd's big things is like, you can't write it as a formula. You have to teach people how to think. And so it can't have solutions to every problem.
Permutation.
Yeah. It's got to just have a fundamental set of principles to follow. And so I guess my question is, do you think that this idea of operating out of unfamiliar territory and those sorts of things fits in with that doctrine? Is that part of what they're after?
Let me jump in on that real quick. Just the word expeditionary. She used that word and it's abused throughout the military. And a lot of people hear it and they don't really understand. The whole point of the military is like go, right? We go deploy, we go to war, we go on these trips. And you see the word expeditionary in almost every Marine unit refers to itself as the something expeditionary brigade or force or platoon. Everything is Marine expeditionary, whatever. And it's, I think, just a cultural reminder that your whole point in life is to go.
To not be permanent and fixed.
Not fixed. And it's the difference between a fort and a camp, right? A fort is a permanent installation. A camp is anywhere you raise the flag at, is the way I was always taught. And so Marine Corps bases, the big ones, are all referred to as camp. Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton, because the whole point is we're here until we go invade you. And then we're over there now, right?
Interesting philosophy.
Yeah.
Like, just in the naming of the bases.
It is an inherent part of the culture. It's woven into them. And compare that to the Air Force, where we tend to be fixated on our air base, right? The runways. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes into a runway. A bajillion tons of concrete goes into that runway, right? It's hard to move it. It's pretty darn permanent once we put it there. It takes years to break up a runway. They actually, I've seen them do it, have to break up old runways and stuff. And some of our more advanced aircraft, the stealthy airplanes, for example, they're not real expeditionary. It's actually really hard to send them forward because they're usually kept in air-conditioned, climate-controlled facilities. Their fuel has to be climate-controlled in some cases. You can overheat the fuel for airplanes.
Yeah, I think they had to paint the fuel trucks a different color for some of those aircraft because the fuel was too hot. Everything
MJ's talking about as far as going forward, it sounds simple when you're hearing it on a podcast. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And it's a habit pattern. And it's just, I think it's a cool part of the Marine Corps culture. And it's something the Air Force right now is trying to steal. And thinking back to like 9/11, there's a book about what we, the United States military, did right after 9/11 called Bush at War by Bob Woodward. He's a Washington Post reporter. And he talked about some meeting where the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, sat down as generals, was like, okay, we just got attacked. Let's go. Let's do this. And the Army's like, okay, well, I think we can invade Afghanistan 6, maybe 9 months. We can get you there to go invade because it takes that long to put all the tanks onto trains at Fort Carson, Colorado, or Fort Knox, Kentucky, or whatever. And then you have to train them out to a port like New Orleans or Long Beach or whatever. You got to put them on a boat. The boat has to sail all the way across the Pacific or the Atlantic. Then you have to,
the Marine Corps is like picking up a rifle. Like, let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah, and we actually have ships that have gear on them ready to go in various places.
Yep.
So what do you think about... Sorry, were you continuing that thought?
One last thing on that is the Air Force, we're like, yeah, we can launch a bomber right now, but what do you want us to bomb? And everyone's like, oh. And that's the problem is you need information to make any of that work. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to the OODA loop thing.
Yeah. So MJ, what do you think? Is that like, do you think that this idea of sending you around to work out of unfamiliar territory, is that a deliberate thing because of that doctrine, or is it just a matter of repetition and practice and because it's the Marines and they're screwing with you?
No, I think it's definitely by design, and it's valuable, even though it can get a little grinding sometimes to kind of be away from your home base a lot. It definitely has some training value, and then even a kind of subset of those bigger training detachments will often do, and this is true of all aviation. The military will do cross-country flights, and those kind of serve a similar purpose, but it could be a smaller group and you can send out your more junior guys just for the weekend or whatever.
Well, a lot of the time we call that seasoning, right? Seasoning, because you get exposed to so much more stuff when you're on the road, and more of that like chaos of real life hits you when you're on the road, right?
I guess one of the other things I was going to say about it being by design is that Is it just an excuse for vacation? Like, is it, I'd really like to practice flying out of Hawaii, actually.
It's funny that you mentioned that because people certainly do abuse it. And of course, in the Air Force, we carry our golf clubs in the airplane. So there's that. But there was one time we had to go to Hawaii. It turns out that there are certain places, like one airplane has a glide bomb, right? And it can glide 20 miles. Well, any normal range in the United States won't let you shoot it because it could glide so far, it could glide into like the next town over, right? And so we started looking all over the world for where we could drop this glide bomb. And the options, I swear, were Hawaii and Australia. And we're like, dudes, let's go to Australia. And the entire Air Force was like, no. And we're like, no, how about Hawaii? And then, of course, we got a ration of shit about, you're just going on a boondoggle, whatever.
A boondoggle.
A boondoggle. It's a technical military term. And we went, and it was a little bit of a boondoggle, but we did drop the bombs, and it was almost the only time we got to drop them before we took them to combat. So it's choose wisely where you go.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, for us, most of the time, I mean, my squadron was in San Diego, and so most of the places we went were less cool than San Diego. It was a lot of times it was out to the desert, Nevada, the eastern part of California,
no
Arizona.
one goes to Fresno on vacation. Right?
The Marine Corps is like, we're going to show you what the desert looks like.
But the thing of it is that even though the location might not have been the coolest place ever, there's also an additional aspect of camaraderie and getting to actually live with everyone and be all at the same place at the same time with all of the people that you work with that you don't normally get when you're at home and you just go home after work. That also kind of adds to the training environment. We get a lot of work done when we're in these things. So even though there is some expense to it and some people can kind of see it as a boondoggle, we really do get a good value out of it because we'll put in a lot more hours of work every day. We'll get, a lot of times we'll go to a base that's right adjacent to a range that we want to use, and instead of having to fly an hour to our back and forth to our base one way at the front and the back of each flight, we'll be able to instantly go right into the range, do what we want to do, and so the training
saves a lot of gas money,
right?
So it's easy to knock how much it costs to do those trips, but one of the things in my community was that was one of our only opportunities to work with our customers. So our supported forces, the Army teams, the Navy teams that we were working with, that's the only time you get it, is when you go off station and you get to go work with them. And you make a lot of money on that as far as building credibility and building teamwork.
Interacting.
Across, yeah.
Yeah, I think we went to Creech Air Force Base one time several years ago.
No one goes to Creech on vacation.
Yeah,
also.
well, the Marine Corps clearly goes there on vacation. It's outside of Vegas, and that was kind of an interesting experience for us. But we actually did kind of have a mutually supported relationship with the Air Force there, and I got to set up a fake target convoy in the range using our external capability of my helicopter. So we picked up some Humvees, set up a little convoy out in the range so the Air Force guys can have some fun shooting that, and it was all together a good time.
I love that the Air Force called in the muscle, and it was not only the Marine Corps, but it was their pilots. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So can you talk to some of the other, like, I see the benefit in credibility and interacting with people and just the practice logistically of moving from one spot to the other. But can you talk about how, in a combat sense, especially as an officer, that would shape, how it gives you insight and shapes your decision making and the things that you might have to deal with overseas?
Well, because the more times I guess you've gone through the process of like thinking through all of the things that you need to do to be able to operate in a different place, how you're going to pack up everything, what you need to bring with you. These aren't, logistics. It's like one of the least sexy but most important things in the military. You're kind of doing that on like a more micro level, just involving yourself and your unit. So just going through that process is going to make you realize, how you could have done things better, or what mistake you made last time that you're not going to make this time. Just like anything else, it's just like packing up your house and moving. The more times you've done it, you start to develop a process and you figure out what's the best way of doing things and develop your own internal TTPs, stuff like that.
What's a TTP?
A technique, procedure. Nice. Or techniques, procedures.
And
I think it's all.
We should add a TTTP.
An extra T.
Yeah.
So beyond just the logistics, though, I guess, like, do you think that benefits you in a combat setting? And I guess it's good to highlight here. Did we talk about the JTAC stuff? The MJ does JTAC stuff.
Oh, by the way, MJ is a qualified Joint Terminal Attack Controller. That is the DoD qualification to call in airstrikes, and the same qualification that a combat controller in the Air Force would get, or a TAC-P in the Air Force. Some SEALs get it, some Rangers get it, and MJ has it, which is pretty badass.
So potentially you could be in a position where you're doing ground combat things. And in our last episode, we talked a little bit about this. I think we touched on it, where all Marine officers go through like your basic infantry commanderly thing.
Yeah.
Where does the fact that you have to like pick up and move and you get used to working in unfamiliar environments play into your ability to call shots and maneuver on the ground? Like in a combat sense, in a combat leadership sense, especially for the Marines, it's about maneuver warfare and, you know, pushing deep past the flanks of the enemy and those sorts of things. Like I'm looking for, like, you need to be adaptable, right? Like you as a Marine, and especially as a Marine officer, you've got to be adaptable. You've got to be fluid,
Comfortable in a chaotic
you've got to be able
environment.
to make adjustments on the fly. And so like the Marine Corps, just by what Jim was saying, naming it a camp, like it's a cultural thing. Like the Marine Corps has established a culture of being adaptable. And so I'm trying to hone in on the ideas of decentralized command and as they apply in like a more general sense, and maneuver warfare.
Part
and
of
whatever.
it is it's so deeply part of their culture.
Yeah,
that they
it's
probably
almost
don't even
hard
think
to
about it.
draw out. It's definitely like completely embedded in the culture of the Marine Corps, to the point where, like, I mean, even Marine Aviation, our command and control agencies are decentralized. They're usually not positive control. They're usually procedural control, and then we get kind of the commander's intent, and people go execute. And I mean, I'm not saying that there's never any direct decision making coming from on high to the aircraft, but that's like the ultimate way that we plan to be able to operate, especially if we did go into one of these peer-on-peer fights, is to be able to kind of give people their quote-unquote marching orders, and they know what the commander's intent is, and then they go out and execute it, because we have been spoiled in the recent past of being able to have almost near constant communication with each other, but that's not always going to be the case depending on where the next fight is, and we have to get comfortable with lower level people making decisions, and that's what keeps moving the fight forward. And that is part of the Marine Corps culture, and hopefully something we can hang on to, because in today's day and age, with like all the connectivity that we have and people get kind of used to that, it's dangerous to start like wanting to have people control every movement of their troops. And I think a good analogy I heard was, we had somebody talk about how they were watching this platoon maneuver from a UAS feed in the COC, basically.
A UAS is like a drone.
Right, exactly. And
And a COC is like a...
I think it's Combat Operations Center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cock.
I wasn't going to say
Like
it.
a COC is a generic term, but it could be like a Joint Operations Center or a,
So back at
whatever
the home
level.
base, people were watching the feed, right?
Right,
And they were
so-
trying to intervene.
Well, yeah, so you have like a platoon down there maneuvering, and the higher level commander is watching them and trying to like backseat drive them, more or less, if you want to say that, and telling them, oh, you should turn left here, but you have the platoon commander on the ground being like, he can actually see, no, that's like a thicket that we can't walk through, and there's just different perspective. But
So,
having
imagine this from a law enforcement perspective. If your lieutenant or your captain could watch your body worn camera
Live.
and talk in your ear,
This is
and be like, no, don't tell him that.
Yeah, this is exactly where I was. Well, law enforcement is not where I was trying to go with this, but where I am trying to go with this, and I use the law enforcement thing as an analogy because it's what I know, is if you want decentralized command, and this is something that I've kind of pushed, because in my culture, there there are a lot of leadership and commanderly types that want to avoid the next bad outcome. And so they do a lot of the micromanaging thing. And one of the things that I'm constantly pushing is you can't do that. You need to push the decision making down and give them the freedom of action.
And it's hard
to arrive at their own decisions.
It's hard to do that when you're under so much pressure to make sure that bad outcome doesn't happen.
And it comes with a degree of acceptable risk.
Yep.
But the way that you get there and hopefully build the better decision makers in your culture is by
season them.
By deeply embedding it into everything that they do.
Yep. And also it's that seasoning, right? You send that young captain or that young lieutenant, oh my God, out to go run that off-station training event. And the Air Force is trying to shift its culture closer to what the Marine Corps does with expeditionary work. And that specifically the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the head general in the Air Force, has said, I want you to send captain flight leads out to go run these off-station detachment training events. And the whole rest of the Air Force, like the colonels and the generals in between him and those captains, is like,
yeah,
you're going to do what?
One of the hard things, like for law enforcement, and this is why I think this is why we started talking about this and decided to turn it into an episode, was agency to agency, things are totally different. East Coast to West Coast, totally different. Like what I do in Arizona versus what an NYPD guy deals with, they're completely different problems. Training at the department level. If I wanted to train an agency of 800 people versus an agency of like 8 or 8,000, I have to do things completely different. And I see there would be so much value in taking a bunch of cops or police trainers and sending them to go work in another department for, I don't know how long your detachment things are, but.
Well, an aside on that, and this might be too political, so you can get rid of it if you want, but like that point that you made, I often think about that because I think there's this narrative in the media that all the police in America are on like some kind of group chat saying like, let's go persecute such and such group of people. And I don't think it couldn't be further from the truth. Like,
right. In fact, it's the opposite. It's very compartmented. Like you see pockets of, maybe agencies or
day shift to night shift.
Yeah.
might have a different culture.
And they don't really have any understanding of what, and an example of this is there's a guy that I can't remember his name, but I know he's like a political activist type now, but he was a cop. He was like a cop in like Baltimore or something. And he's got some notoriety now. I just can't remember off the top of my head, but he's been on like the Joe Rogan show and whatever. Michael Wood, maybe? Does that sound right?
Oh.
I don't know. I'm not sure. It's something like that. But
I don't listen to podcasts. I'm joking. I listen to this one.
But like he went on this podcast and he was talking about the problems in law enforcement. Now he's like a police, like political activist, like fighting for change or whatever. And he talks about all the corruption and the bad things about cops. And he's telling these stories about the things that people in whatever his agency were doing. And he would talk about like, there was an example he gave about like after a drug raid or they served a warrant and they were like taking a piss on some guy's bed or something like that. And I'm like, if one of us did something like that, we would be like fired on the spot. Like it just wouldn't, it's zero tolerated. Like that's not even a thing.
Yeah.
But if those sorts of things are occurring and you witness those things like in another agency or on the East Coast or in a different area.
How many law enforcement agencies are there in the country? 10,000, something like that. So you have 10,000 little cultures, and one thing is embedded in the others, a different thing is embedded in. Bringing back to MJ the Marine, forgive my ignorance about Marine Corps stuff, but my understanding is that there are two different basic training boot camp sites, right? There's Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, and Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Parris Island. And so you have East Coast Marines and West Coast Marines. How does the Marine Corps standardize between just among itself so that you don't have two different Marine Corps running around?
There definitely is a cultural difference between the different parts of the Marine Corps. And I don't know that it goes back to the boot camp stuff specifically. Like there's a little bit of ribbing here and there with regards to that. But the Marine Corps organizationally is kind of split up into three large organizations. And it's primarily East Coast, West Coast, and Pacific. And among our actual kind of warfighting organization, we have what we call our MAG TAFs, which is a Marine Air Ground Task Force. And it's scalable. That's the inherent concept, but there's kind of some standing versions of it called a Marine Expeditionary Force. That's the largest version, and there's the smaller versions. There's kind of an intermediate one, Marine Expeditionary Brigade, that kind of just has a skeleton staff at any given time. But like I said, they're scalable to what, whatever the nation's warfighting needs might be that would come up. And then we have the Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is the smallest ones, but those are actually the ones that are constantly forward deployed. So those are the ones you'll actually hear about at any given time, even if we're not engaged in an actual, named war. There's always Marine Expeditionary Units out with our Navy partners on ships, and they go from Japan, from the West Coast, and from the East Coast around the world. So that's kind of a huge part of our expeditionary mindset, because you'll often see that when something crisis comes up, these guys aren't going to hold the ground, but they're ready to respond to something within a short time.
So at any given time, there's like a brigade of Marines sitting on a ship or several ships out in the Pacific or the Atlantic or the Mediterranean or the Persian Gulf, right? What do you do if you're a Marine sitting on a ship? Like, what does your day look like? Because you can only...
It's a PG show, guys.
Well,
even a PG, what the hell do the Marines do on the boats?
So Marines on the boat, and I personally haven't been on the MEU, but I have been on a 5-week detachment on a boat, and I would say, the aviation-related Marines are working on their helicopters and conducting flight operations. The ground Marines, they often kind of have a lot of hip pocket classes, training, physical training, as much as they can fit in there. They do have to get pretty creative, I know that's kind of one of the leadership challenges for those younger officers and staff
keeping them busy.
Is keep finding things for them to do to stay productive and stay out. They actually staying out of the way of the Navy running the ships is kind of a big deal as well.
So this is a militarism that I think a lot of people outside the military don't get, is that a bored soldier or Marine is a problem. And a lot of military traditions come from things we do to keep them busy. Shining shoes, shining brass, painting things. A lot of that is that we're just trying to keep them from tearing the walls down, right?
I need to stop to take a real quick break to talk about the Mantis. The Mantis is a little Bluetooth device that goes on your gun. You can use it in live fire and dry fire. They have a couple new products. The X3 is a smaller version of their original product, and it's got better battery life and a quick detach mechanism, so it's a little bit easier to put on and off. They've also got an advanced one, the X10. That one is going to measure more dimensions, and they also have the X7, which is specific for shotguns. So if you want to get shot-by-shot analysis to improve your shooting with data, go check out the Mantis at mantisx.com. So we talk about how like the fluid culture of the Marine Corps, and if I understand Jim correctly, maybe a little bit more fixed or rigid culture in the Air Force. In terms of flying, is the flying component different? Because we use a lot of aviation stuff on the show, and we draw a lot of parallels, whether it be law enforcement, medical communities, aviation communities. Flying, as I understand it, is pretty, like, it's a pretty fixed quantity. Like, you use a lot of checklists, right? You're pretty like procedural. There's a lot of rules. There's a lot of requirements. So how does the culture of the Marine Corps fit into the aviation component? Is it different? Like, is flying between Air Force and Marine pilot procedurally, checklists, very kind of regimented? Is it the same way, or is it different?
Well, I think there's parts that are the same and parts that are different. I had a great time one time when I had to go meet up with some fellow Marine helicopters to pick up some parts at an Air Force base, and we're used to kind of a little more, I don't want to say loose interpretation of the rules, but as helicopters we do a lot of VFR flying, and our flight plan as published counts as our flight schedule counts as our flight plan, and the Air Force is a lot more into, like, you go into base operations and give them your flight plan and all of that. And it's not to say that we don't have those things in the Marine Corps as well. We operate under the same FAA rules as everybody else does. But I went there, picked up some parts, met up with these other Marine helicopters, picked up the parts, and then as soon as I turned on my helicopter so we had power so we could refuel, I called up to their ground control and asked if I would be able to just depart VFR without a flight plan out of their airspace, and they said they had no issue with it. Well, when I got to the hold short line, they had an issue with it, and they wanted me to stop my helicopter, park it, go back to their base operations building, file a flight plan, and I was like, well, I asked you ahead of time if you were okay with this, and they were not okay with it at that point, and it's kind of highlighting like there are things that are a little more regimented in the Air Force because they have the people to do things like that. Like their fuel trucks would only come to us if they were assigned to our BUNO number, like the specific number on the side of our plane.
License plate number.
Yeah, and so because we were trying to get some fuel, and there was like 4 fuel trucks refueling these other helicopters, were like, hey, can you come over here and refuel us too? We got our card and everything, and they're very like. The Air Force has like a bajillion fuel trucks. It's not like that. Us, and their flight line. There's a lot more rules about how you can walk in and around the flight line. We literally just have Marines run and
commander's intent.
The new guys, part of their fun and training is running back and forth, getting all the tools and stuff that they need, and they're just running up and down the flight line, just getting stuff done. It's a totally different way of doing business, and it's not bad on the Air Force. They have the resources to do that. We don't.
So there's layers to that. So the first thing is, on the outside looking in, there are big differences between how the Air Force does business and how the Marine Corps does business, and
I think that it's also fair to point out that there's a difference between a fixed wing pilot and a helicopter pilot.
Absolutely.
Right?
And there are differences even aircraft to aircraft. So, for example, a B-52 crew might have a certain level of regimentation in terms of how they execute a checklist, whereas a KC-135 tanker crew might have a different way that they do checklists and a different flow. So it varies even aircraft to aircraft or unit to unit in localized standards for that. The thing about how we run around on flight lines in the Air Force, it's a security thing. And there are details of obviously security I can't get into, but they literally paint a red line, and they have certain points along that red line that you can cross and certain points that you don't. So there's this big invisible, it's visible, it's a red line, but there's this big invisible barrier, right?
Keeping it simple.
Yeah. And the goal was to create choke points where procedurally we can tell if someone's breaking the rules, if someone's trying to sneak onto the flight line and sabotage an airplane, that sort of thing. So that's the where it came from. And of course, when we see on a Navy base or Army base, Marine Corps base, people just running around all willy-nilly on a flight line, we're like, oh my God, that's crazy. How do they have any security out here at all?
It's not OCD compliant.
Yeah. And it just happens that we have that procedural method of maintaining security on a flight line. That's all we're shooting for. And it's frustrating sometimes. And sometimes the red line has worn off somewhere and you cross it and the cops show up and they put you on your face and you're like, but that's my airplane. I'm here to fly it. And they're like, yeah, but it's sitting on my parking lot. No, you're not.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
9.5 inches.
Yep.
How do you find the balance between that procedural stuff, following the checklists or not crossing the red line, and also not overly dictating to your troops everything that you have to do and giving them marching orders and how they accomplish that as their own thing?
Well, there's a fundamental here in rules. The way the Navy writes rules and the Marine Corps as a lesser form of the Navy, the attitude written into the rules in the Navy is that you can do it unless we tell you can't, right? They're negatively worded rules. In the Air Force, they're positively worded. You can't do it unless we tell you can do it, right? So it's a culturally different thing in terms of rules. And I did pilot training with the Navy, which is why I'm talking about it and why I'm kind of talking over MJ here. But I've seen that go both ways. I've seen naval aviators make what, in my judgment, were very stupidly risky decisions because they could. And I've seen Air Force guys fail to make reasonable decisions because they didn't feel like the rules supported them. And so, is one better than the other? It depends. I think that the Navy and Marine Corps attitude toward rules allows you more freedom. but they also don't typically carry nuclear bombs, right? So it's not that way on accident in the Air Force. And I don't say that just to defend, my tribe or whatever the fuck, but
says the Air Force officer,
says the Air Force guy. And there are parts that drive me crazy, right? But I at least know the context and the history behind them. There's a saying, and we've said it before on the show, about you have to know the rules in order to break them. And part of knowing the rules is not just being able to recite them or take a test on them. It's understanding the history and the context and the intent behind why those rules even exist.
Yeah, I think we have a saying in naval aviation that the NATOFs, which is our flight manual for how to operate the aircraft, is written in blood, because usually something will happen operationally that we'll find out, oh, well, that's a problem, or somebody gets hurt, somebody gets killed, and that's kind of how we add on to making it more safe over time. But yeah, like Jim said, we tend to have the negatively focused rules. So until told otherwise, you can do said things. And even, I think there's a clause in the beginning of the NATOFs that says this is not a substitute for sound judgment. So it means, like, if the rule is contraindicating sound judgment, you could, break that rule in the interest of making the correct decision.
Have you had any in-flight emergencies?
Nothing super crazy.
You never had to auto-rotate or...
No.
Okay.
No one's ever had to auto-rotate in a CH-53
Really?
Echo. No, we have 3 engines, so...
That's a lot of engines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, remember we talked about, we were comparing sizes, and
it's a very big helicopter.
Yeah, it's bigger than the Crown Vic and the C-130. So
that's true.
Well, longer.
Maybe not. Never mind. So we have a similar thing in our rule book at my agency. That's rule number 1 is you can break any of these as long as you have a good reason. And also similarly, not necessarily blood, but many of those rules are certainly named after people and stupid stuff that they've done.
The Mike Memorial night shift rule.
Yeah. So a lot of similarities there. There was I was reading, Jim and I were talking about this recently. I was reading this book, and it talked about how surgeons have these medical checklists and procedures that they go through when they're doing a procedure. And, for example, if they're going to give a blood transfusion, they're going to give a patient blood products. Somewhere on the checklist or the procedure is to verify the blood type and make sure that whatever they're going to give matches the patient that they're going to give it to. And one of the things they talked about as a critical component of training in terms of building scenarios and simulations was less about, and I might be editorializing this a little bit and kind of adding my own interpretation, but the message that I took from it was, it wasn't necessarily about making a procedure or the checklist that said, okay, well, if we're giving patients the wrong blood product, we need to add a step that says you have to check it. What they found was, it was when there was an interruption in the procedure where they took a sidestep left or right from the checklist, and then they went back to the checklist. That's when they missed it. So the issue wasn't necessarily building it into the checklist. It was teaching the surgical teams or the surgeons how to cope with interruptions. Does that ever come up in flying or in-flight emergencies or combat leadership type things?
I can't think of an example where I got messed up on the flow, but the scary part of that is I'm sure I have messed up the flow due to an interruption, right? And we talk about the knowns, the things are unknown, and the unknown unknowns.
Right. Things you don't know.
Yeah, and the worst type of spatial disorientation and the worst type of unusual attitude is the one you don't even recognize. And that's what makes this scary. What Mike is talking about is that when you're going through the flow and you miss something, not only did you miss it, you don't know that you missed it. And where that'll get you is things like not putting your landing gear down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think about this idea of, police officers are taught to watch the hands, and And so like that's part of the checklist when you interact with a person is like, what are their hands doing? And so whatever distracts you from that. So like, for example, the one that comes to mind is if I'm looking at a guy's ID, like he hands me his ID and I look down at it, or I get my notepad out to like, if he doesn't have ID, but I'm asking him his name, date of birth, and I go to write it down on the piece of paper. And that is an opportunity to, I mean, just by default, I'm looking away from his hands.
The time it takes to look down is his opportunity to injure or kill you.
Right. So those like catalysts for errors, I think, are important to identify. And it's just an interesting point, I think, with the nature of this discussion, because the difference between the Air Force and the Marine Corps, and then the difference between the culture of the Marines in terms of an expeditionary force and maneuver warfare and decentralized command and commander's intent and being constantly moving and unfamiliar territory, blah, blah, blah. But also it being in the aviation component, following procedure, following the checklist, staying on task. And I think back, MJ, to what you talked about in the last episode, where you kind of you went internal was the term that you used, and you're kind of stuck in this scenario, and you go, what do I need to do right now? And you fall back to, okay, let's start with the fundamentals. Let's get back to the checklist, scan your instruments, start looking at, these things and identifying what the problem is. So there's an interesting balance between like free-forming stuff and having a procedure or a checklist or a specific,
and I think this actually gets us to a really good point, right? It's easy when talking about inter-service stuff to assume one is better than the other. It's a competition, and that's the nature of our cultures. And I will give my Marine Corps friends a hard time, and they'll give me a hard time. And at the end of the day, we respect each other. And at the end of the day, I want to take the best attributes from all of them. And there's a time to be free flow, and there's a time to be procedural, right? And that's what we want from our cops. That's what we want from concealed carriers. That's what we want from our military aviators and our soft guys is recognize what situation you're in. When is it time to say, okay, we're off the script. Let's go. Fuck it, we'll do it live. Leroy Jenkins, whatever you got to do. And there's a time to be like, okay, it's a little too chaotic right now. What are the things I need to get done right now? And I do my self-talk. Okay, I'm going to get back on my instruments. I'm going to maintain aircraft control. I'm going to go wings level and stop accelerating or decelerating. And the judgment that you develop over the course of your seasoning, over the course of your time in field training or your time as a young aviator going off station on these detachment trainers, that's where you start to develop that judgment to say, okay, we need to speed things up here. Let's go off the script. Or to say, whoa, we need to slow things down. There's a little too much adrenaline flying this helicopter or flying this airplane right now. It's time to go slow as smooth as fast, and make all the, shooting trainers twitchy. But you might need to do that. And I've seen that on the airplane too. Okay, let's actually open up the checklist instead of just flowing through the checklist. Let's go back and make sure we didn't miss something.
Yeah, and as much as we were emphasizing kind of differences between the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Navy, all these different services, I think coming back to the aviation thing, that's something that's a little bit different than what you were talking about, Mike, which is that you might have a checklist that you were kind of trained on of like how to interact with a person, but I'm guaranteeing that you're not actually like breaking out a piece of paper and like reading those steps every time you come up to a person, because like they would probably laugh at you. Or shoot you, I don't know.
Interestingly, some people in society want that.
Good afternoon. I am Officer Mike of the XYZ Police Department. My badge number is 12345. Do you know why I pulled you over today?
No, shut up! I'm still talking.
Yeah.
But in aviation, like that's, and I know without even really saying it to Jim or having a conversation that they're trained the same way, and we all have faith kind of in each other as aviators, which is its own unique thing, that they are trained not to memorize their checklists, that they are supposed to actually look through each and every step, and that should eliminate some of those issues you were talking about earlier where you forget the steps, and it seems repetitive, and sometimes it can get a little bit tedious when you have to break out that, because we have little pocket checklists that we have, but it's important so that you don't forget steps, because you can get complacent if you think, oh, I've done this 1,000 times and I know what to do. There's a reason it's written that way, and it's just always a good reminder.
So there's 2 points on that. The first is we talked about the differences, and now you're talking about the similarities, and I think it's important to point out that even though you guys fly in different services, Jim, like you said, you went to
Navy
training.
Yeah.
Right. So it's embedded there anyway.
And if MJ and I got in a Cessna right now today,
it would be compatible.
It would be pretty darn compatible. I would understand what she's saying. And, there are little servicisms and stuff like that. There was the way, and it's actually recently changed, when an Air Force guy gets on the radio to say, my landing gear's down, I'm coming in to land. It's, Basher 5-5, gear down, full stop is how I'd say it on the radio. In the Navy, you actually counted your landing gear. I have 3 down and locked for the touch and go. And when you're calling for formation, you call all of the landing gears that are down and locked. So you might say 9 down and locked for 3 airplanes in the formation, which to the Air Force guys sounds silly. But I would fundamentally understand what she's doing and why she's doing it, and our timing and tempo would be fundamentally the same as we go through our procedures. And it's not necessarily true when you have a civilian pilot. And there's nothing wrong with civilian pilots. They do their thing their way, or purely civilian commercial pilots. But it is different. And I think the standardization we have among military aviators makes it easier for us to jump in the cockpit with each other and just go.
Yeah, that's kind of why, this is a little bit of an aside, but why military aviators are so highly sought after to go fly in the civilian sector is because of, that interoperability, the knowledge that we're pretty flexible, can handle different emergencies, even though...
And we fly ghetto aircraft, so we often have those emergencies.
Well, I think the FAA just not too long ago, when they upped the number of hours that you had to have to be a commercial pilot, made an exception for the military. That was half of what it required for civilian pilots. So even me as a helicopter pilot, there's companies out there that are looking to hire people like us, because even though they may have to do a little bit of investment in getting us our multi-engine ratings and stuff like that, the experience base is there, and it's something that's sought after, even if it's not exactly equivalent to what you were doing in the military. That's how strong the correlation between military aviation among all the services is.
Well, I think there is a lot of good points in here about the influence of culture and where some of that comes from, as well as where the insight and some of the driving forces in decision making play into that balancing act between all the things that we're talking about. This is a unique opportunity because you guys kind of represent 2 different entities there. So I just thought those were interesting insights. And when we started talking about it, it's a good opportunity to jump on it. Jim, you got anything else?
No, we're grateful to have her. We're grateful for the opportunity to talk about those nuances. Again, it's not about the Marine Corps is better, the Air Force is better. They're all good at what they were designed to be. Yeah. Right. And when we can take chunks, we want to take those chunks off and make something better and faster and smarter.
And I think the key here, and I mentioned earlier, I used that analogy of like, imagine if we took cops from one agency and they went to other agencies to see what they're like. It was another Boydism, was no system is consistent only within itself. You have to have, points of reference on the outside to be able to, take the good and the bad and learn from it and build on it and grow from it, So I just think this was a good, we needed to capitalize on this. So yeah. Appreciate both of you guys. MJ, you got anything else?
No, it was a really good opportunity to talk to you guys about these things. And I just want to point out that Boyd had a number of Marines at his funeral and only one Air Force officer.
Yep, that's true. All right. Jim, anything else?
I just want to talk about 0.6 socks.
0.6?
They sent me a couple of samples to try out. I've been wearing there's a tan one. I'm not sure which model it was. I've been wearing with my combat boots. I've tried them now with 2 different combat boots, my Loas and my Danners.
They got a tactical line.
The tactical line.
Specifically, if military, public safety, look for that.
And we have a discount code, right?
Yep. TAC Tangents 2019 will get you 25% off.
So I've been trying them out and wearing them pretty religiously. I wear them every time they're clean, and I like them a lot. I'm pretty brand consistent when it comes to what I wear. I wear the same T-shirt under my uniform as I wear in real life and stuff, and same socks. Traditionally, same brand of socks. But I'll tell you what, I'm pretty darn sold on the 0.6s. They've been very good.
So the things you have to know about 0.6 is merino wool is one of those materials that is particularly good at managing moisture and those sorts of things. And 0.6 has a technological advantage to managing moisture and evaporation. They're 37.5 material. All their products are made in the U.S. and their socks in particular have a lifetime guarantee. So make sure you go check them out at 0.6.com. Don't forget that you can subscribe for new episodes on the 1st and the 15th. You can also find us on social media. We're at Tac Tangents. If you want to reach out to us, info@tacticaltangents.com is a good way. Also, if you want to support the show, go give us $1 for each new episode on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com and search for us. We appreciate the support, and that money's going to go back into supporting the podcast and helping us grow. That's all we got. Good talk.